This console generation, the PS5 and Xbox Series consoles, was promised and had the potential to become one of the great generations, with all of these studios ready to make games for their respective platforms. Really powerful consoles that were supposed to eat other consoles for breakfast. The promise of 60 FPS, ray tracing, and so much more. And it all fell apart. This console generation has been a disaster. The Xbox Series consoles and the PS5 were shown as early as 2019 and midway through 2020, and everyone was super excited. Just as everyone was preparing to get their brand new Xbox Series consoles and PS5, everyone found out that they were going to be hit with sold out everywhere.
And there are just ghoulish garbage men on eBay right now selling PS5 systems for 3 or 4 times what they're worth.
The world was hit with a major chip manufacturing shortage. And if that timing wasn't bad enough, this was about the time planet Earth was hit with a major pandemic. Completely ruined manufacturing, shipping, for people to get things like a brand new console. PlayStation was having their own issues. They had a ton of great games, but 7 or 8 of those were remasters, remakes, and then the rest were just straight sequels from the PS4. But PlayStation gamers are starting to ask, where is the roadmap? Where are the games? Why did I buy a PS5 if most of these games are cross-platform? They're still releasing on the PS4. They're still designed from the criteria that made them run on a PS4 with extra upgrades. Where is this true next generation experience we were hoping for on the PlayStation 5? All while this was happening, PlayStation was still in market lead. Some of the biggest publishers like EA, Take-Two, and PlayStation were setting game prices from $60 up to $70, and the rest of the industry knew they'd have to follow suit. And not only that, PlayStation was charging an additional $10 to upgrade your game from a PS4 version to a PS5.
The only way to get both the PS4 and PS5 versions at the same time is to buy the digital deluxe edition, and there is currently no upgrade path planned, so they can't then spend an upgrade fee to buy the PS5 version.
And just as they put themselves in that position, PlayStation hiked the price of the consoles.
Sony announced that it would be increasing the price of the PlayStation 5. They have sort of been strong-armed into increasing the recommended retail price. I'm sure that's something that a lot of us do not want to hear.
The problem was, just a year before, they had touted in business meetings that were made public that they were already turning a profit on the PS5, and turned around and raised prices $50 worldwide except for North America, where PlayStation and Xbox were very close in sales figures. Let's talk about the hardware, because this has become one major disaster after another for people who were promised great hardware on the Xbox Series X, the world's most powerful console, and developers weren't using the features. Full RDNA 2 became a problem for Xbox. Things like sampler feedback streaming, variable rate shading, mesh shaders, things that if you haven't watched some of my tech videos, you wouldn't know what they were. And if you're a developer, you'd probably say, I don't know what those are either, because multi-platform developers, even Xbox's first-party studios, were not using full RDNA 2 features. You weren't getting extra performance in multiplats, and you certainly weren't seeing 60 to 120 FPS Xbox first-party games with any sort of ray tracing until years into the generation. To make it even worse, some of Xbox's games, or it seems like many, were running at 30 FPS at launch. Things like Redfall launching at 30, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. Starfield, one of the biggest flagship games that has come out for the Xbox platform from these acquisitions, 30 FPS.
But for our style game, I honestly feel 30 feels great.
And then Hellblade: Senua's Saga. That game was also 30 FPS, only for these to be later upgraded to 60, showing that Xbox just needs far more time than ever to get their games to run the way they promised they would when they showed the console off 4 years ago. Then the game services saw a price increase. PSPlus raised their game prices while changing tiers, and then Xbox Game Pass also raised their prices, even changing their tiers by kicking out first-party games that were promised originally into the highest paid tier, and giving PC Game Pass players the best value. Xbox's only saving grace was Xbox Game Pass. It was mostly filled with small gems, indies, some games most people probably won't play, and then a few big games. It's actually turned into a big wait-and-see service. Then came acquisition season. This was supposed to be the most exciting time for gamers and make games unique only to their platform. And the first one was in 2021 with Bethesda and ZeniMax. This was supposed to be such a big moment. And Phil even sat there and told you guys this.
If you're an Xbox customer, the thing I want you to know is this is about delivering great exclusive games for you that ship on platforms where Game Pass exists.
Just months into the official acquisition of Bethesda with Xbox, and a couple of their games were already slated to be exclusive to the PlayStation console. Once Xbox finally got their games in, they launched an absolute dud, Redfall. This is probably one of the major failures in this console generation. A first-party game from a tried and true studio, Arcane Austin, launched at 30 FPS on a console that could run that game far, far better than that. PlayStation was cutting deals with Square Enix, and they had the Final Fantasy games, and those were doing quite well. The second one, Final Fantasy Rebirth, had less sales than the one before. They also cut an exclusive deal with Final Fantasy 16, which also had, as Square Enix always says, lower than expected sales figures. PlayStation had their own studio problems, especially with Bungie. Bungie was a big acquisition for them, a very expensive one, and they had major issues within that studio, laying off a bunch of employees and creative directors and leadership at Bungie outright leaving, and amidst turmoil with overspending, and they even oversaw games like Concord.
Sony is quickly taking Concord offline after selling only 25,000 units.
Concord was probably the biggest failure for PlayStation this entire generation. It's a $40 hero shooter and then flopped within 7 to 12 days. They completely closed it, gave out full refunds, and it's just another part of where PlayStation is not listening to their fans. Bungie and Firewalk Studio behind Concord are both in severe trouble, and it is really expected that these studios may be dissolved and folded back into Sony Interactive Entertainment or outright closed. It has been a horrible generation for those studios. Then came the studio closures, especially immediately after Redfall was such a massive failure. And they brought out Hi-Fi Rush, and it was one of the highest rated games that Xbox had put out, a brand new IP, and it failed to sell. It shadow dropped, it was on Game Pass, no one bought it. They shut down Tango Gameworks and Arcane Austin, the people that brought us Prey and Dishonored, and of course, Redfall. Xbox was not alone in studio closures. PlayStation also closed just as many studios this generation. In 2023 or so, saw massive layoffs. Studios were making 10 to 15% cuts. Xbox and Microsoft, just spending all this money on acquisitions, laid off a bunch of people that worked at Bethesda and ZeniMax, a company that they had saved by bringing into a multi-trillion-dollar company. PlayStation closed down London studios. PlayStation also shut down Japan studio, and 900 people, or 8% of the SEI corporation that works for PlayStation studio team. Another thing that made this console generation a disaster was undercooked, unfinished, and delayed games. Many of the multi-platform studios had major problems delaying games, releasing them buggy and unfinished, but Xbox had a really bad problem of not delivering with the promised features that their games were supposed to launch with. One of the most prominent things that Xbox failed to do was launch a new Halo game. Halo Infinite was supposed to launch in 2020 alongside the 20-year anniversary, and it clearly needed a delay. And once it did, it was already being reported just months before the game would come out to prepare fans that many features would be missing, like split screen, campaign co-op, and a bunch of multiplayer features that should have been there at the launch of the game. Forza Motorsport was also soft delayed over a year, maybe even a year plus, As it finally came out, the game was visually a bit undercooked and feature-wise a step back from Forza Motorsports 6 and 7. PlayStation also delayed some of their most prominent games like God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West. A difference being that those games came out fully polished with very few issues. And Xbox had the opportunity to buy another set of studios and publishers, and it was Activision, Blizzard, and King. PlayStation spent a ton of money and resources to try and stop the Activision Blizzard merger. This has been well documented, but what ended up coming out of that is Xbox made sure that Call of Duty, the biggest franchise they would now own, would always remain on the PlayStation. Xbox completely threw away the opportunity to keep all of the games could be exclusive to only Xbox Game Pass or PC and console on Xbox. And they went the total opposite direction, which we'll talk about in just a second. A big pain point for the console generation was performance and how these games looked and felt. And no one was more guilty of that than the Xbox Series S. This console was supposed to be promised to be as powerful as a mid-gen last generation console with the 60 frames or even 120 frames performance. And it did none of that. As the console generation went on and games got more demanding, now developers were quietly complaining about the Xbox Series S being a difficult platform to try and optimize for. So then we start to see games skip the Xbox console because they're not ready for the platform, or the Xbox Series S is holding them back. The Xbox Series S has become a major problem. It's already caused the delay or missing of games like Black Myth Wukong, Baldur's Gate 3 for several months, and the upcoming Dune Awakening is being delayed on Xbox consoles because of the Xbox Series S. As people waited for the roadmap, some games got canceled. Fans of Blizzard know what to expect when it comes to a game, and they promised to bring out a game called Project Odyssey. It was a survival MMO game. Just as it was about to get off the ground, they canceled Project Odyssey from Blizzard. And then not long after that, PlayStation had their own cancellation problems. They were set to do some 20 games as a service titles. PlayStation was already pivoting away from the single-player, third-person, over-the-shoulder, stealth element, open world, sad dad gameplay that they've always offered that fans love, so they could diversify their content and bring more multiplayer games and more games as a service titles that would have more longevity, but mostly so they could make more money. PlayStation had invested much of this generation into games as a service titles that quietly got completely shelved or completely shuttered. And one of them that hurt the most
is that this game is big.
The Last of Us Factions 2. PlayStation now had a major gaping hole next to Naughty Dog Studios, who now has nothing in the works until they start working on their next franchise, Uncharted or The Last of Us Part 3. It's not all doom and gloom, and I've put up this graphic that shows you that PlayStation and Xbox have offered some 25 games for this generation, and they've actually reviewed very well. Almost half of these games already or were planning to launch on the PlayStation. This is where 2024 came in with an absolute rocket blast to fans.
So we made the decision that we're going to take 4 games to the other consoles, just 4 games, not a change to our kind of fundamental exclusive strategy. 4 games, no promise beyond that. So if you're on those other platforms and you see these 4 games coming, please don't take it as some signal that everything's coming. It's not.
Fans were waiting for Fallout 5 or Elder Scrolls 6, and Elder Scrolls 6 and Indiana Jones, Starfield, games like that were said to be exclusive on the platform in court. And then, once we finally got the final reveal for Indiana Jones and the release date on Xbox.
But there is one more thing.
But the simple reason why they haven't been able to grow either of those platforms is because they haven't consistently put out great games. The wait for games is usually about 9 months every single year. PlayStation has the same problem. This console generation has been a disaster, and it hasn't all been lopsided. PlayStation fans have been asking for a major showcase, something they haven't had in over 2 years. They've been getting regular state of play some 3 to 6 months apart. Where's the big showcase? And the president of PlayStation said, we don't have enough new IP to show in a major showcase right now, which is really puzzling for PlayStation fans that know that Sony Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, and all of their big studios that have been very quiet over this generation have nothing that is concepted or finished enough to be showcased. And then there's the last gut punch. Here we are in the mid-generation. PlayStation announces the PS5 Pro, a mid-gen console that is astronomically priced above and beyond the price hikes that they did a couple of years ago. And now as we see analysts start to pick apart the games they showcase, something that really only boosts resolution in a performance mode and doesn't really raise the settings or bring that promise of great ray tracing performance that we thought we would get at the beginning of the generation. The console generation has been so difficult for fans who couldn't get a console, didn't get the power performance that they were promised, had to deal with price hikes for games and consoles, and then price hiking the services like PSPlus and Xbox Game Pass. What could bring this console generation out of its lull and offer something exciting and deliver that promise for fans? Hopefully, we have a couple more years for Xbox and PlayStation to really finally get their traction back with getting their consoles to deliver great games, deliver that performance, and hopefully lower the price instead of continually escalating it and make it more accessible for people who want to get in and play games from PlayStation Studios and Xbox Studios. But I think that's a really big ask. This is Colteastwood. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it through this, oh, congratulations. If you did, write in the comment section, Lukather, or I guess you would write it Lukather, and he's my favorite guitar player. If you ended up enjoying this video, let me know by liking and subscribing to the channel. Hit the bell to be notified of new content. You want to further support what we're doing here on the Colteastwood channel, working hard, trying to make lots of videos and trying to just get excited about gaming. You can hit the join button below, or you can join the Patreon. Links are in the description. Also, you want to check out what we're doing here on the Ecstasy podcast. That's every Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Middle-aged game guy and I, or Mag, are talking about the games. We're talking to people and getting them in the show, interviewing and having guests. It's great. Check that out. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and other platforms. You want to check it out on demand with, with the earbuds in. But thank you so much for your support in that. I really appreciate it. All right, now I want to hear what you think in the comment section. I know it's kind of hard to believe that PlayStation had a difficult time as Xbox did. They both had a really difficult time. Xbox has had the hardest, most difficult disaster of a console generation. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm going to be watching and I'm reading and I'll reply. And as I always say, please be nice.